Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Chris Verlenen. I'm the GBPM project lead. The goal of this presentation is kind of giving you a generic overview of what the GBPM project is all about. For those who already attended the previous session, that was more focusing on the web-based tooling. I'll kind of expand on all of the other tools that we have available as well and try to give some small demos in the process. So I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of what the GBPM project is about, some walkthrough in some of the more technical details, and then a demo and some more advanced concepts and roadmap. So you probably already saw this slide. We kind of use that as a starting point in each presentation. But just to make sure, the GBPM project is all about BPM, as the name kind of says itself. So we want to do business process management. Now, there's a lot of possible definitions you can give business process management, but the one that we focus on is we see a business process as something to achieve a business goal. That's the first thing. And to achieve that business goal, we're going to describe the activities that you need to execute to achieve that goal. So you can see like these yellow blocks. Those are typical activities that you need to execute. And we're also going to describe the order in which they need to be executed. So in this case, we're going to use a number of building blocks like start events and then user tasks and in parallel gateways, etc. We're going to use these, we're going to combine these to describe a certain business logic, how to achieve a certain business goal. And we're going to do that graphically. So this is not like low-level code we're going to describe. No, we're going to try and model this as a higher-level business diagram. And so why would you do that? So obviously, you could just implement all your business logic in a programming language like Java or whatever. There's a lot of potential benefits that you could have. And I'm not going to explain and prove that this is actually valid. There's a lot of research in this area that can show you this. But there's obvious advantages like, first of all, visibility. If you look at, well, this is a slightly more complex diagram, but if you look at that and you kind of know the language, it's a lot easier to figure out what this process might be doing rather than trying to look through application code and figuring out what's going on. It's also at a higher level. So what we try to do is we try to avoid putting a lot of implementation details in here. We try to make these processes domain-specific using higher-level concepts so that not just programmers can look at this, but also business analysts, for example, or your end users could look at this diagram and try to figure out what's going on. The goal is that once we've drawn this diagram, we've added all the necessary details, the goal is that we can actually execute this. So once we start executing it, the process engine has a lot of features out of the box, like monitoring. You can listen to the events. You can visualize what your current state is, etc. And then based on that knowledge, we believe that you can probably start using that knowledge to improve your process. Make sure that, well, if there's changing requirements or you need to change the business logic, well, you can do that on the fly. So you don't need to redeploy your application or rewrite your application or enter a new development cycle. No, you can dynamically change your business logic on the fly. So that means increased agility. The business process itself has its own life cycle. And then finally, we also believe that once you've got a few projects set up, you'll also see the speed of development go up. There won't be like your first processes. You have a learning curve. You have an infrastructure to set up. But once you have that, it's actually pretty easy to start adding new business processes to that. And so the GBPM project, well, what are its main goals then? Well, we're focusing on what we call executable business processes. So you could just use BPM as a modeling tool, just to model your business logic. But we want to make sure that once you've put all the effort in modeling it and added all the details, you can just start executing them. So that's what's called executable business processes. And the engine itself, it's kind of like the core of the project. That is a very lightweight engine. So you don't need an application server or an ESB or whatever to run it on. No, it's a very simple Java component that you can basically run almost anywhere. So I, for example, have it running on my Android phone. So it doesn't need a lot of resources or a lot of memory. The core engine itself is lightweight. So we believe that you should be able to run it everywhere. We have people running it in the client or on application servers as well, of course, but you have the choice. Second of all, we're this version of GBPM now natively supports the BPMN2 spec. For those who do not know what that is, it's one of the latest specifications for describing business processes, and I'll get back to that. But we now natively support that standard. And as I said, so you can now decide whether you run it like embedded as part of your application, or you're gonna use the GBPM project more as a service so that other applications can connect to it. Second of all, it's not just about the execution. The business process has an entire life cycle, going from modeling to deployment to execution to monitoring. We support the entire life cycle, not just the execution. And we've also moved away from only supporting developers. No, we definitely want to make sure that we're also targeting business analysts, end users. They don't necessarily are able to create an entire business process from scratch and add all the details, but we believe there's at least that you should try to achieve some collaboration between your developers and your business analysts in modeling your business logic using a business process. And then finally, we believe that, well, the engine that we have now, we've actually built in a lot of advanced features to support more flexible processes and adaptive processes, and I'll get back to that later as well. So if you look at like what are the different components that are available, you probably saw some of those already in the previous presentation, but to give you an overview, the core engine is the heart of the project, right? Simple Java components allows you to execute your business processes. Well, this is basically the only required component. So we're not like one giant BPM suite that you just have to use, and you build, those are the tools, you cannot customize them, and you have to use all of them, or you're just not able to use the suite. No, actually the core engine is basically the only required component. All other components that I'm gonna show are optional. Like for example, we have a history log. If you wanna log information about what happened with all your processes, you can log those easily in the history log. You don't have to use that, but it's easy to configure it. Similarly, a task service, so it's actually a very common requirement to have end users participate in your process, so they basically just have to perform some task. For that, you need some kind of task service that manages the task list of those users, etc. We have a default implementation based on the WSHT standard. It's an optional service. You can put in your own, or if you don't need human task, you don't need this, but it's one of the core services that we also support. Then if you go to like more on the modeling side, we support two types of editors. First of all, there's more the developer-centric edit tool, which is an Eclipse plugin. So it extends the Eclipse IDE with a lot of features like wizards and debugging support, etc. And there's the web-based designer that is more targeted towards business users. It is more a collaboration environment. So basically, you can model the same processes in both the Eclipse and the web-based designer, and you can easily move from one to the other. But the first one is more targeted towards developers, and the second one is more targeted towards business users as a collaboration environment. And then finally, there's the monitoring and management side. So we have a web-based management console that allows you to do various things like starting instances, monitoring their state, looking at your task list, and generating reports and things like that. You can see that then the life cycle of a business process, like here are modeling, there's support for deployment, there's support for execution, there's support for monitoring, and then based on that information, you can like go back into the modeling phase. So there's support for the full life cycle in this tool set. Now I'll quickly go into some details on the core engine, like what's the API you can use, some details on BPMN2, and then some of the more advanced topics as well. So if you look at like what is the core engine, how do I talk to it, how would I execute my first process? So basically, there's a separation between what we call the definition side and the runtime side. So when you're creating a business process, you're creating these process definitions. Typically, you're using a graphical designer to do that, and you store them in what we call a knowledge base. So all the definitions that you're creating, all the process definitions, you just store them in a knowledge base. That's the definition side. Then if you want to start executing your processes, you're creating what we call a session. So a session is kind of an object that you use to talk to the engine. So you instantiate a session, and then you can do things like starting processes, signaling events, etc. Whenever a process is started, we create what is called a process instance. You can see that process definition is kind of like a class in Java, and a process instance is like then an object, an instantiation of that class. So for example, if you have an order process, that is whenever an order comes in, that process will execute that order. Typically, you have, for each order that comes in, you create one process instance that represents the state of that specific instance. So what's the API then for that session? What are the typical things that you can say to the engine? Well, there's not that many, so it's actually not that difficult. First of all, there's start process. You can start a process. Each process has a unique ID, and you can optionally also pass in parameters. So that's like data associated with your process. So you can just pass in data. For example, with that order example, you typically just pass in the order so that it can be used in the remainder of your process. Second thing is events. So there's a lot of different kinds of events that you can use in business processes. You can just tell the engine, well, this event occurred, like an exception occurred, or a signal, or a message was received, things like that. So that's the second part. And then the third part is management methods, like get the current state, get my process instance, abort the running instance, things like that. And those are typically the most important methods that you would use to interact with the process engine. Now, how would then the Hello World example look like? Well, like I said, there were two parts, the definition side and the runtime side. So the first block here is actually creating a knowledge base. So on the third line, you see we're creating a knowledge base, and we're actually loading a BPMN2 process into that. Here on the second place, you can see that then we're instantiating a session so that we can talk to it. And here we're just saying, well, start process with an idea. And that just started the process. So this is like the Hello World example in Java to create your first process and execute it. Now that is like on the Java side, how to integrate with, how to talk to the engine. Well, what's the language that we use then for the business process itself? Well, we use now the BPMN2 standard. So it's a relatively new standard, probably about 1.5, 2 years old now. And it is actually defined as a standard to model business processes. And it defines a language that can be shared across vendors. And actually, it's the first standard that is actually very successful. There's a lot of big vendors that are starting to support this as well. So we believe that actually has the potential of becoming a true standard for describing business processes. And it defines a lot of the building blocks that you can use to create your business processes. First of all, there's all different kinds of activities that you can use in your business process. And here you can see different kinds of task types, like you can have a user task, you can have a business rule task, which means that you'll be invoking some rules as part of your process. You can invoke external services, you can send and receive messages, etc. So there's a lot of predefined tasks that you can just use as part of your process. Second type of constructs that are available are like gateways. So those are used to do branching. So if you have one path and you want to split it up into multiple, either by doing all of them in parallel or by selecting one of those, there's a lot of different constructs that you can use to do that, also to do the merging afterwards. And then there's quite a few types of events. You probably don't need all of them. You probably don't even know what they all are. But events, think about those as like an exception occurred, a signal was received, a timer was triggered. So there's a lot of predefined events that you can use in that context as well. Then there's the data perspective. So typically a process is managing data, so you can model that as well. There's a few constructs for that. And then finally, there's things like swim lanes that you could also use if you want to. But this is typically like the BPMN2 spec. It defines a language, both the visualization, so this is like a graphical visualization, and how it's actually stored on the file system. So BPMN1, the previous version of this specification, actually only defined the visualization. Now with BPMN2, we have also an XML-based serialization, so you can save the process to achieve real portability. So I actually heard a question like, if you're using a different tool, can you actually still use, like, import them into our tool? Yes, as long as the other tool kind of adheres to the BPMN2 spec, you should be able to just take that as the input, maybe edit it, add some more details, and start executing it on GBPM5. Now, one of the things that we believe is very important to achieve like true BPM, I was talking about advantages like higher level business processes and including business analysts into into a collaboration with your developer. Well, one of the things that we believe you need to do is to have these domain-specific processes. So we want to make sure that you can use your own domain-specific concepts inside your business processes, because that's the language that the business user is familiar with. And so this is an example of a clinical decision support use case where it's a kind of fictional example, but we're going to describe the treatment of a patient using a business process. And to do that, we actually introduced a few new domain-specific services. First of all, the one with the red cross, it represents a nursing task. So that means a nurse needs to perform a certain task. We also introduced something for medication, so you need to administer some medication to a patient, and also the concept of a notification, sending a notification to, for example, a general practitioner. So these concepts are domain-specific. A business user can definitely understand what they are, but you can just define them. So for defining your domain-specific concepts, you basically need to give them a unique name, and you're also describing, well, this is the input that I'm expecting, and this is the results that it'll be producing. So for example, that medication task, that typically defines that it's expecting like the unique ID of the patient that it needs to be administered to, the name of, or the ID of the medication, the dose, the administration route. So those are kind of like the properties. That's the input. It could also, if it's producing results, you could model those as well. And once you've done that, so that's typically a job that a system administrator or something like that will do. Once you've done that, you can just start using them inside your palette. So we allow you to easily extend the palette with your own domain-specific concepts. There's various reasons on why to do that. The most important thing is that it allows you to model your business logic on a declarative way. So you're describing what should happen, and you don't include all the implementation details on how it should happen. But there's other benefits as well. And what we also try to do is we try to provide you with a set of services out of the box so that you can just use. Because there's quite a few services that might be reusable across multiple users. Like, for example, we have a Twitter example. If you want to send a tweet in your business process, you can just start. We have an implementation that allows you to do that. You can just import that basically and start using it. And to be able to import it, we created the service repository. So it's a concept where you can just store these service definitions. You can just go to there, download the ones you need, and they will automatically show up in your palette. We've got implementations for things like human task, invoking Java methods, web service, REST service calls, emails, Twitter I already mentioned, a few more advanced, Google Calendar integration or file system operations, etc. But we believe, well, first of all, you can register your own services, because if you have your own domain-specific services, you can easily add them to your own repository. And we're also hoping that people who are creating these service implementations that might be reusable, that they're willing to kind of contribute that back to the community so that we can like add them to the repository so that anyone will then be able to reuse that as well. Just to give you an example of how it then works, these are a few screenshots. So if you want to like include the Twitter inside your processes, you just browse to the service repository, you select the Twitter service, you import it, and then it'll show up in your diagram, like in the bottom there, in the palette, there you see the Twitter task. And you can drag that into your process, just fill in the properties. In this case, we're just going to fill in the messages that need to be sent. And you configure it, well, you basically have to configure it like with some credentials, and then you can start sending these Twitter messages inside your process. Then one of the other main requirements that we often see is the use of, or the inclusion of business users, end users inside your business process. So if there's some task that an end user needs to do, that's called a user task or a human task. And VPM2 has support for that. So there is a concept like a user task that you can just use from the palette. We have an implementation for that. So we have a service that will track the task. So that typically is you as an end user can log in. You can then query what's my task list. You can select one of those tasks and you can complete it. That's the most simple life cycle. Our implementation actually supports a lot of more advanced features as well. Think about internationalization, delegation, revocation, escalation, so that if a task, for example, is not completed within a certain time, we reassign or we send a notification. There's quite a lot of features that are available. Also things like crew-based assignment, so you don't assign to one specific user, but you assign to a group of users so that anyone in that group can claim the task. There's role-based assignments, rule-based assignments, sorry, so they can actually use business rules to decide who to assign the task to, etc. So we believe we have a pretty advanced implementation based on the WS Human Task Specification, but it's a pluggable implementation. You can easily extend it or replace it with your own solution if you might have one, for example. Some of the extra features that I didn't mention yet, but I think are probably worth mentioning, because otherwise I'll get a question at the end about it anyway, is first of all, there's process instance migration. I mentioned that you can dynamically change your business process. So that means that while it's running, you can change a business process. The question is, well, what happens to the already running process instances? The answer there is typically, by default, we just keep using the old definition. That is the default because that is definitely the safest option. So that's why it's the default. If you want to migrate a process instance to like the newer definition, that's what we call process instance migration. If your process is like, if it's only like a few small changes, we can probably do that automatically. Because all states that were in the old definition, if they're still in the new definition, we can do that fully automatically. If you do some kind of revolutionary change, you have the ability to plug in your custom migrators. So we do support really complex migrations as well, but then you'll have to write some of the migration logic yourself. The second thing, and I'll show that in the demo, is we have support for unit testing. So you can actually just click on a business process and generate some unit tests that will then check whether the process is actually behaving as it should. So that is like a template. You can fill in some details and generate some unit tests. There's like utility methods to create a new session to check whether a process instance was completed, etc. If you're using or you want to use GBPM in a Spring or OSGI context, there's support for that. So we support Spring-based configuration files where you just define, this is my session, these are the processes I want to load, I want to configure it with or without persistence, etc. And you can just inject the session inside your Spring application. And for OSGI, the core jars are OSGI enabled, so you can just start using them and deploying them in an OSGI environment. For people that have been using GBPM 3 or GBPM 4, like I mentioned, we're moving to BPMN 2 as the new spec now. So that means that if you've been using GBPM before, that was using the GPDL, the proprietary language that we had before, you need to migrate these into BPMN 2 now. There's a migration project there that will try and assist you in that. It's probably not going to be a very simple thing because there's changes in the language. There's sometimes some mismatch. So we believe in a migration process where you use this tool to generate a new version, and you can then customize it, fill in some additional details, and then start using to execute that on GBPM 5. If you want to like see like, okay, I want to take a look at this, maybe I can use this. What we believe is the easiest way to get started is the GBPM installer. So what that does is it's a download, it's an AND script that you can use to generate an out-of-the-box working environment, including all the tools that I mentioned so far. So it does generate, or it does install like an Eclipse plugin with the GBPM and rules plugins installed. It installs Governor, the repository with the designer, the web-based designer to create your processes. It installs a GBPM console so you can monitor them, and it has some services like it's using an H2E memory database with the human task service and the historical configured. So you can use that to set up the environment. There's a sample process that you can use to just walk you through each of the components. So we believe that is a very good point to start. Once you've kind of gone through this, you can then, for example, customize the application, change the persistence configuration, start defining your own processes. But it should at least help you in setting up a out-of-the-box working environment. We also have quite a few examples that you might want to look at. So the evaluation example is actually the one that we use by default in the installer. But there are quite a few more That just show things like how to do looping. So that's actually a combination of multiple gateways with a loop going back. How to do multiple instances. A multiple instances node allows you to execute this subpart, so that subprocess, it allows you to execute that once for each element in a collection. So I've, like the order example that I mentioned before, an order might be composed of multiple order entries, and you might want to do something once for each entry. You can use a multi-instance activity there. So you can say, well, for each order entry in the order, I want to just execute this subprocess. We include examples. This is a quite advanced example on human task interaction. I'm not going to show all of them. This is one that actually shows you how to integrate a business process with business rules to do relatively advanced constructs as well. So we believe that there's actually quite a few examples. For all the constructs, we have some simple examples that explain how to use it as well. As of in the last two community releases, we actually also moved to JBoss AS7 as the default container to deploy all the tools on. So AS7 is really fast, and it allows us to quickly start up the installer. But it's not just an application server. It's actually one step to moving to the cloud for us. So because AS7 now also runs on OpenShift, so on the cloud, by enabling our applications to run on AS7, we actually now also allow them to run in the cloud. So all the tools that we have, they currently run on AS7 in OpenShift. We're still working on like a download, like some download that you can just use and put into OpenShift to have your own set of these tools in the cloud. So that's what we're still working on. Should be available in the next few months. But yeah, as of the latest release, actually all the tools already run without any issues in the cloud. Now I'm going to just give you a demo to give you a better look and feel of what the tools do and how they behave. Theo mostly focused in the previous presentation on the web designer, so I'm mostly going to try and show some of the other features. So I'm just going to create a new process. So what I'm going to try and show you is a very simple process. We're going to create, starting it in the web-based designer. We're going to then move to the Eclipse-based plugin and complete it. Then I'm going to generate some tests and forms for it, and then execute it, and then try to move it to the GBPM console so you can actually see it monitored. So if the first thing so I can go to like the web-based environment and create a new BPMN2 process. I need to restart my. So I may start up the server first, otherwise this won't work, of course. So this is actually the process that I will be creating. So the idea is I'm just going to show you some of the constructs that are available. So what we're going to show is we're going to start a process, and then we're going to do two things in parallel. At the top, you can see that we're going to just execute two tasks in sequence. So the first task, I want to show you some like human tasks. So that means that humans will be participating. They will be executing those tasks. It's a very simple process that will just ask a user to fill something in and then just show the reply in the second task. And in parallel, I'm also going to start the timer. So that timer does something like escalation. So in this case, I just configured it so that every second it just writes out an error message or like a warning message that the process is still active. But you can basically model whatever you want there. So it's going to execute. It's going to trigger every second this message until the process instance is completed. But typically, you use this to, for example, send notification emails or escalation emails whenever necessary. But for the sake of this demo, I can only show like a limited, like a relatively simple case for the sake of time. So let me go back here to Governor. So I can just create a new business process here. And so this is like what we believe is like the business analyst tool. So we can use this to kind of create like a first version of the process. So I can do something like this start event. I'm then going to do two things in parallel. So I'm going to create a parallel gateway. I'm going to say, well, this is a user task. So this is task 1. I can create a second user task, then go to the end. I'm going to make this terminating, so that means that the process instance will end as soon as I reach this point. And I can do also a timer here, and then reach the end. I can call this like the escalation. Here, I'm going to make this a script task. So this is kind of like the web-based tool. The Eclipse-based tool is very similar. So you can start drag and dropping using these constructs that are available out of the box. You just save this, and well, you could go then to Eclipse and import it, but I'll just switch to this one already. So this is actually the same, but I added some details already. Let me just show you, for example, that if I select, for example, this timer node, it has certain properties. So each of these nodes has various properties, and I'm not going to explain all of them. The documentation typically explains what are the properties and how you can use them. But as you can see, this node has two properties, a timer delay and a timer period. So the delay means how long I'm going to wait, and the timer period means then if I'm going to repeat it. So in this case, I say I'm going to wait 1 second and then repeat it every second. Then in this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an escalation. It's actually a very simple one. Not sure you can read this, but what this does, it just writes out that the process instance is still active, and it then writes out the ID of the process instance. And then I also added some details for the task. So for example, in the task, well, I've given it a unique name, task 1. I'm specifying the actor, so the guy that needs to execute this task. In this case, I'm not specifying a hard-coded value. I'm using a variable, so I'm going to say that the actor that needs to perform this is actually a variable, is the user ID variable, and I'm going to dynamically replace that. So when starting a process, the user will fill in his username, and then the task will be assigned to that user. I can also show you then that there's some data input and output mapping. So this is probably like the most complex thing in BPMN2 that you should be doing. That's like the data management. So typically your process is a sequence of tasks, but then one task might produce some data and another task might consume this. So in this case, I'm going to say that task 1 is producing some data. It has a parameter answer, and I'm going to bind that to the variable response, so that in the next task, I can then say, here, there's the input mapping. I can then say that I'm going to map the response that I got from the previous task, and I'm going to map that back into this task as the answer variable. So that's basically all you need to be able to execute this process. And to show you, I can now execute this. So I can basically click on this and generate a unit test for this, and then fill in some details. But I already filled in the details in this example. So again, it's not that relevant that you're able to read all this. If you're familiar with the API, you'll see that it's actually at the top. You can see like it's doing a case-session.start process. So it's going to start my process, and then in this case, it's going to first complete the first task and then complete the second task. And just to show you the kind of debugging capabilities that are available. So like this is the process that we're going to execute. I need to, so debug as a normal unit test. So I put a breakpoint immediately after starting the process. So you can see that here I'm starting the process. I put a breakpoint here. So now it's waiting. It's not yet executing this. You can see that the escalation method is executing. The timer is executing every second because the process instance is still active. But the kind of debugging capabilities that are available allow you to always like look up what the current state is. So let's just enlarge this a little bit. So I just clicked on the session. This view then shows me all running instances. It's currently just one. If I double click on that, I can graphically see the current state of my instances. You can see that it's currently waiting in the first task because that border is slightly thicker than the other ones. So these are like the kind of debugging capabilities. You can at any point stop the engine. You can look at the state. There's audit trails as well, and there's unit tests to easily start creating your business processes. So that's our support for developers to be able to really implement, debug, and execute your business processes. So if I then continue the process, it'll actually execute correctly. But the second thing that we then need to do is, if we want to start using this, like executing this in the GBPM console, we need forms. Because like I said, we're asking input from a user, we're presenting output to a user. We need to have some forms. Again, we allow you to dynamically just generate these based on the process definition. So that's what I did here as well. At this point in this demo, we're using a simple HTML template approach. So what this is just showing is it's just a form that will be shown to the user. It's an HTML5 form, and it'll ask the user to fill in his user ID. There's similar forms for the first task and for the second task. The idea is that, well, this is one of the ways of doing this. This is very developer-centric. A developer can basically create these forms for you. We're also working on what we call the form builder. That's more a graphical drag-and-drop version. So you can actually, a non-developer could also use that tool to just drag the labels, drag the text field, and create the forms like that. So if I then using the integration, I can just, all of these resources that I created, I can just upload them to Governor, which I already did before. If I go to here to the demo package, you can see that the demo process is here. There's a lot of other assets here as well. Like these are the task forms, task 1 and task 2, and there's the demo, the image as well. So once all of that is uploaded to the Governor repository, you can actually start executing it. So if I now log into the GBPM console, and go to the process overview, basically you can see all the processes that are currently running. The demo process is the one that I just created. There's still 3 instances running, but I can start like a new one. It'll pop up the form that I just created that asks for my user ID, so I just fill that in. And if I select an instance, here this is similar like in the Eclipse plugin. You can visualize the current state. So at this point, I'm waiting for the first task to be completed. You can also look at like the variables that are defined for your process, etc. And I can go to my task list. Oops. Refresh my task list. So then actually that is task 1 that is currently being created by the process. I can view it. So question is, how did you like the demo so far? So I'll just give an answer. I hope you liked it. So this answer will then be fed into the process, and the next task is created that just, in this case, just shows the answer. It's just to show you that how you do the data binding, how you integrate a user task, etc. It's a very simple, not real life case, but based on this, you can actually start creating your own processes, of course. Yeah, and if I just complete this one and go back, you can see that if I refresh, that the instance actually terminated. And then for reporting, it supports, GBPM console also supports the generation of reports. For reporting, we believe that you should probably try to define your own report. So the report that I'm showing here is some kind of generic report. It just shows the number of instances that were created. So you can see that last night at 12 o'clock, I was still running my demo 6 times. I did it a few times this morning. But yeah, so this is a very generic overview. You can see how many instances are still running. So like I said, there were still 3 still running from previous executions. So this is kind of like a generic overview. You can get an overview of how your system is behaving. But we believe that you should probably try to create your own domain-specific reports. So this is based on the Eclipse Bird tooling. So the Eclipse Bird tooling allows you to create these kind of reports. You just define the data sources, you define the queries that are necessary, and how it should be visualized. So we believe that by using that tooling, you can actually define your own key performance indicators. You just look at all the data that we log for you in the GBPM history log in the runtime database, so you can use all that. You can combine that with your own data and create your own key performance indicators. This is an area where we're going to invest heavily in the next few months, in the next year. So we're going to try and make sure that our business activity monitoring capabilities are much more flexible. It's a lot more easier. So you can, for example, in a process, just annotate the process variable to define it as a key performance indicators, and it'll automatically show up in a diagram. Features like that. So, but we believe that this tooling, so the Eclipse Bird tooling to do this kind of reporting already supports quite a lot of these features as well. All right, and now back to the slides for some more advanced features. So one of the things that you will notice if you look at like traditional BPM systems and you try to model some more complex situations, you'll see that as soon as you try to do something really complex or something that requires flexibility, like you need to be able to deviate from the process definition, or you need to give the end user the capability to choose what should be executed and what not, typically you might end up in situations where it's very difficult to model that using a traditional BPM system. And if you follow like research in that area, there's a lot of acronyms that are currently being used, like adaptive case management or unstructured nonlinear flexible processes, event-driven BPM. They're all trying to find a solution for this. How do we model more complex, more flexible processes? And so what we actually tried to do is we created the engine and we've added some flexibility into it. And on top of that, we also allow you to combine your business processes with other paradigms like business rules and complex event processing to be able to model these more complex situations. So we believe that you shouldn't just be using processes. So for GBPM, it's focusing on the process execution, but we actually integrate quite closely with the rules project for business rules and for event processing. And we believe that by offering you one solution that allows you to combine these paradigms into one application, it allows you to model these kind of more flexible and complex situations as well. And just to give you an example, well, this is, again, an example in clinical decision support, but it shows you if you enter a hospital and you're going to explain to like a general practitioner that you want to use business processes to describe the treatment of patients, the first thing that he's going to say is that he doesn't want that because he really needs the flexibility. He needs to be able to define what should be executed and what not. He needs to be able to deviate, etc. And so the BPMN2 specification actually has a construct which is called the ad hoc subprocess that allows you to do this kind of flexibility. What you can see is that this subprocess is not like all the nodes in there are kind of floating on their own. We call them process fragments. So there's a few process fragments floating in there, and the engine is not defining, or the process is not defining which of those should be executed. We give control back to the end user, the general practitioner in this case, who will be deciding, do I want to measure the blood pressure, do I want to measure the heart rate, or do I want to do the blood test? You can also do that multiple times. The ad hoc subprocess kind of gives back the flexibility to the end user. But you can also, for example, start adding business rules to that. So business rules are very good at pinpointing one specific situation. So you can easily write a business rule that says, if you're over 50 years old and you have a history in blood pressure issues, then we're going to automatically trigger, for example, that blood pressure measurement. So by combining, in this case, some business rule logic to define some more complex situations or to find some exceptional situations and combine these with a normal process, we believe you can actually model quite complex issues like that. Similarly, for example, if you have a heart rate monitoring device that's actually sending out a lot of low-level events, you can use complex event processing to analyze these. For example, to try to derive that a user might be having a heart attack or might be having issues, and then generate a higher-level business event that could be consumed by your business process. And then finally, this ad hoc subprocess also allows you to dynamically add things into a process instance without having them as part of the process definition. So if the general practitioner realizes that there might be some additional task that needs to be done, but it's not in the normal part, it's not in the process definition, he can just add it to this ad hoc subprocess dynamically. It'll be logged as part of this, so there's a trace of what's happening, but you can dynamically add new stuff into this even though it's not in the definition. So you can start deviating from the definition. But it's important that it's part of this process instance, so it's actually logged and et cetera, and you could maybe even use that information to improve your process later. Finally, something about roadmap. So GBPM currently, the latest release is GBPM 5.3. So the biggest features that we delivered there is the Eclipse Designer. So we're actually working on a new Eclipse plugin that supports the full BPMN2 spec. So we only focus currently on a subset of the BPMN2 specification. Basically, a lot of the analysts are saying that it'll probably take several years for vendors to implement a full spec because there's a huge amount of possibilities. We focus on what's called the common executable subset. It's a subset that is defined in the specification that focuses on executable processes. But the Eclipse Designer, the new Eclipse Designer, actually supports the full specification. Also, the form builder, like I mentioned, the graphical form builder was included there. And then for roadmap, what can you expect in the future? Well, I showed you some of like the debugging capabilities, but we actually want to go a lot further with that. We want to add like full simulation and replay capabilities. So you can just like select, look in the history log and generate a simulation that shows what actually happened. Maybe even deviate, like said, if at this point I would have made a different decision, how would it have turned out? I also mentioned like the BAM, the monitoring capabilities. We're extending that heavily, so making it a lot more easier to configure, etc. We're also extending the support for other BPMN2 constructs, etc. And then finally, yesterday it was announced that BRMS 5.3 has been released. So that is the product that is based on GBPM. So it's based on the GBPM 5.2 release. So over the last 8 months, it's gone through a productization cycle. And so it's now, as of yesterday, it's available for customers to buy support. So that means you can now have a fully supported subscription for GBPM as well. Yeah, that's basically. So that was released yesterday. Then if you want to know more, basically the only thing you basically need to know is the GBPM homepage. So that's jboss.org/GBPM. All the other links can be found there. So like the sources in GitHub, we have a build integration for Hudson. That's my personal blog, and this is the preferred communication channel. So if you want to get a hold of us on the conference, of course, just come and talk to me. But if you have questions, all developers try to be on the RC channel. Actually, we changed to Freenode recently. That is updated in the GBPM homepage as well. But just come on the IRC channel and ask questions. All the developers are there. It will try to give you pointers, etc. There's also an email list and a user forum that you can use to ask questions or to give answers. And then finally, if you really want to get more detail or get more feedback, give us more feedback or get more demos, on Friday we're going to have a drop-in center. So in room 105, all the Drools and GBPM developers will just be working there. We'll be discussing roadmap, discussing what we will be doing. But you're free to join us, ask questions, or just start coding if you even want. So that's on Friday. I hope to see some of you there. So that was my presentation. I hope I gave you an overview of all the different components and the direction we're going. Thank you.